Hi, in this video, I'm going to share with us, I'm going to demonstrate um, how to change JavaScript object that I shared in the previous video. If you haven't watched that video, you can spend some time to watch that video. Other than that, you can still continue with this video if you are able to understand exactly what is happening. Now, let's say, for instance, that we say const person is equal to an object with a name. Um, I'm going to use a carries. You can actually use your name. And then we're going to say city. You can use your city if you're following along. I'm going to put Sydney, which is where I am currently located. And then we can see is friendly. Yeah, you know very well if you're friendly or not. You can use true or false depending on what you want. I'm going to put true. Now let's console log person. Let's see exactly what person is actually giving us. Okay, person is actually an object. Person is actually an object with the properties of city, is friendly, and name. Now, like I explained in the previous video, this is actually an object which actually has a reference memory which is passed by reference. Now, if we say const James, let me use cap. James is equal to person. Now, let's say console.log. We're going to console log James. James is going to give us, is going to point to the same memory location which I already explained to us. You can see the values of the name and all that. But obviously we don't want James to have the same name with a carries. So what do? Let's try to see how, let's change James' name, James.name. Let's change his name to James. Yes, we're going to change James' name to James right now. And then let's try to run the code. We can see that James' name has been changed. Are you surprised? I already explained to us that JavaScript is passed by reference and passed by value. And then the values itself of persons, if you actually change it, you're going to also override most of those details. So let's have a look. What is person.name actually referencing to? Let's see person. Let's see what person is actually referencing. You can see person is equally having James, which means whatever values that we actually change in the person's name is equally going to affect whatever listen that is being assigned to it. For instance, we have person that is pointed to the same memory location with that of James, which means if you override any of these property or if you change any of these properties, they are going to be also changed in the James property. Let's try to create another variable. Let's say Jane, and then let's use person. We can equally use James if we want, since the both of them are pointing to the same memory location. We can use person, and then we're going to assign it to person. Let's say console.log Jane. Let's try to see what the value of Jane is. Let's try to go. Okay, you can see that even James, as in James property, is assigned to Jane. But obviously we don't want that. We want Jane to have her own name, and then we want James to equally have his own name, and not assign the same name to Jane and James as well. So what are we going to do? The best option, or the best thing what we can do right now, is to use what they call JavaScript destructuring. Now, how does JavaScript destructuring work? I'm going to explain in another video how JavaScript destructuring actually works, but for now, this is how JavaScript destructuring actually works, which I already explained in the previous video. You can actually check through the previous video to check how destructuring works. I explain how most of these things work, but I'm just going to do the demo of how it works, and I'm equally going to do a new video on JavaScript structuring. So let's continue. Let's say person, and then we are going to say name, and we're going to say Jane. We want to change her name to Jane. Now, if we console log Jane, you can see that Jane's name is now Jane. She is now friendly. Her city is in Sydney. I already explained in the previous video how this actually works. If you're still confused, you can go through that video to check exactly how this actually works. But I'm just going to do the demo. For instance, if we want to change James' city uh, from Sydney, let's say Jane doesn't live in Sydney, she lives in Brisbane. She lives in Brisbane. Let's try to run that. You can see that Jane's city has been changed from Sydney to Brisbane. Can you imagine that? Now, let's say we add another property on, as in let's say age, and then let's say 48. Let's say age is 48. Why is this useful? You can see that Jane has age as 48. James equally have age as 48. But if we don't use the structuring, if we try to change the name of James, it is going to override that of Agaris. Well, sorry, that is Pets. Let's try that as well.